On this episode of Input Output, we are going to be taking a look at the brand new Roland V-160HD. This is, we're in pre-release mode, so we're really excited to get this open and kind of take this through a little bit of a test drive. So you're not going to want to miss it on this episode of Input Output. All right, we have the Roland V-160HD, and I'm really excited about sort of exploring these options. And there's a lot of things in this switcher, and for the price point, it makes a lot of sense. But let's kind of go over just the general lay of the land here, what its functions are, the inputs, the outputs. I'm not going to flip it around like we normally do and do the top-down shot. We're only going to keep it here because there's a lot of cables, but I'll just kind of go over what's in the back itself. In fact, actually, let's start there. So we have 8 SDI and 8 HDMI inputs. 4 of those inputs on the HDMI actually have scalers built in them. So that's actually really important to understand. So if you have different computer inputs or HDMI inputs that are a different scalability, different resolutions, this will actually help with that process where you don't have to set everything to one particular frame rate. You actually have some scalers built into it. So that's really cool. The SDI and HDMI are for inputs 1 through 8, and they're assignable. So you can plug in all 8 SDI and all 8 HDMI, and then on the buttons you can assign which one you want to pick up which input. So that actually gives you a lot more flexibility as far as inputs are concerned. Now on the output side, there are 3 SDI and 3 HDMI. Now they are assignable, and you can assign them for a multitude of different things. So out HDMI 2 is our multi-view monitor. Out HDMI 1 is our program monitor itself. And you can do the same thing with the SDI outputs as well, what you want to see where. So there's a lot of flexibility within that. So you can also assign not only program or preview, multi-view, but you can also assign an auxiliary out as well. And then if you look on the back as well, there's XLR ins, XLR outs, RCA ins, RCA outs. So it's giving you a lot of flexibility when it comes to audio. And something really cool about audio, which we're not really going to be able to dive into today, and maybe we'll bring it back and we'll kind of dive in a little deeper, but there is iPad control. There is a deeper dive into the audio engine in an application that's outside of this. So there are some really simple mixing settings on here, some volume up and down on program, and it really doesn't get into every channel, but that's where the iPad comes into play from a deeper perspective and deeper control. You also have tally outputs as well. So for your cameras, anything from that perspective that you need to show what inputs you're on from a tally perspective. So it's got a DB25 for tally. And then it also has RS-232 as well. So if you're looking to control this with Crestron, Extron, any control system, you actually have some simple control as well. This also has a USB streaming out, and that's one of the outputs that is part of this whole system. You may want to check out a previous video that we had done with the VC100 UHD, which is a scalar unit that has ins and outs and USB. This is from a resolution, it says HD, it's only going to do up to 1080p at 5994. So that's something you may want to consider when you're looking at this. But the functions in here, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive. So let's look at the top of this thing. So we've got the simple audio mixer, right? We've got the audio input level, and then the output level. We also, if we move down the way here, we have image capture. I can capture snapshot images, stills. There's a lot of different stills in here. We can also import stills if we need to. Different user settings, freezing, auto switching. That's really cool. So it has the capability of doing some auto switching between the inputs if you need it to be a more automated thing, where it's looking at audio tracks and video and switching back and forth. There's some intuitive elements. There's some camera control in this as well, which is really cool, where I can ID the camera and I can control some of the most popular cameras, PTZ cameras that are out there, and that really gives a lot of functionality inside this particular unit itself. So moving on down, we have a multi-view monitor. What's really cool about this monitor, it's actually a multi-function monitor, not just a multi-view. I can say multi-view, I can say, let me show all 16 inputs. I want to see all the stills, or I actually want to see the program out. What does that look like from that perspective? Then moving over here, we have the menu. We're going to take a deeper dive in the menu in just a little moment, just kind of looking at some of the settings, some of the things that we found out of the box that we had to configure, things you may want to be concerned with when you're setting it up. Nothing major, but just making sure that you have the right settings so images show up and you're in the right color spectrum as well. So let's go down through the second layer. We have 4 keys, or picture-in-picture keys, so it's giving a lot of functionality in picture-in-picture and keying window, which is actually great for elements like esports or even houses of worship. This gives you a lot of flexibility right off the bat. You could pick the source, where you're coming from. You can do some spot keying, and there's some zooming functions that are all right here on the top. We're not going to really get into that because that would take a lot of time for us to set up from that perspective. Downstream keys as well. So that's you have 2 of those. And then you have a T-bar. We have an output fade. So if we need to go to black on the actual program output, you have an output fade. You also have a sequencer, which allows, it's a level of putting in macros or inputs at a certain time, and it sequences through those inputs. So if you need more of an automation level, where you're not switching buttons or trying to call it buttons, it's just kind of rotating through. If you're using it for some program that is over and over and over again, this actually has a sequencer built into it. So that's something really cool. Now let's kind of take a look at this bus here, or this is the final bus really want to take a look at from the T-bar over. We have all of our program A, program B, or program or A, B, and program and preview. We have all of our buttons that change colors based upon a few different elements, right? What's nice about this is when it's lit up white, it's actually saying, hey, there's signal, and I'm showing signal on that particular button and that input that's assigned to that button. So when you're going through, you can see red and green, obviously program preview, but it is also showing you the functionality of, hey, there's signal on this particular input, FYI. So that's a nice little element as well. Then at the top, we have these different modes that are enabled. What do we want to send to in this mode, the auxiliary, which is green? What input or what source do we want to send to the aux? So I can send aux1, or I can send input 1 to the aux, and then assign one of the SDI or HDMI outputs to see that aux, and maybe it's something like some sort of talent monitor or even a gamer's monitor itself that doesn't really need to change at all, and it needs to be continuous and constant. So we can assign then that auxiliary. It's got memory, so we can recall certain elements of what that particular input is, and then there's macros. That's really nice as well. So if you are looking for, hey, I need to quickly call up this macro with all these picture-in-pictures in this layout every time, then you can recall your macros right from the bus as well. And so going through this bus, we'll keep going. We can assign the input. I can hold down the button, and then I can assign what the input is, the functionality of it from that perspective. So what we will do is we'll get into the menu. I'll show you how to assign that, because right now we've unassigned the camera, and we'll get into that in a moment. Then you have the transition, the mix, the wipes, the cut, the fades, and then the T-bar. All right, so now let's take a deeper dive into the menu itself. So we're going to bring up the menu options. There's 2 pages worth of options. We're going to go through some of them, right? There's a lot of information here. There's a lot of configuration. So obviously we've got the little scroll wheel here and press to enter. So we're going to go to a video assign. So what's really interesting is you have all your inputs 1 through 10 that are listed here, and we can assign different elements or the different inputs. So right now I unselected, right, input 1 from assigned position, and we can go through and sort of quickly add the buttons and the functions of what they are. But an easier way to do that is really within this element here, within the menu. So we're going to select input 1, and input 1, we want that to be SDI 1. So we're going to select that. And on the multi-view monitor here, we can see we've assigned it again, right? And then I want to go down to input 2. I quickly assign that to input 3, or HDMI 3, but we're going to actually put that back to HDMI 2. Now we have both of them back up again, right? So we've got an SDI camera, and we have an HDMI source that's coming in. And you can do that through all 10 inputs. And what's really interesting is I can assign, let's say, inputs 1 through 8, all SDI, and then 9 and 10, HDMI 1 and HDMI 2. So I have flexibility within the 10 buttons and the spaces to actually assign either an SDI or HDMI. And that's what makes it really flexible. It's not just 8 inputs, either SDI or HDMI. It is both at the same time. It sees both. So that's really, really exciting. So we're going to go back out. So that's input assign. Then you can go into the input, the video input settings, and you can see, okay, on input 1, what is it? It's the status. We can go into status. I can change, or I can flip the horizontal and vertical. I can do some brightness, color, saturation values. So that gives some flexibility within the SDI and the HDMI. Same thing, go in, I can flip it. I have the input status. I can go in, I can actually see how many pixels it is. It's a 3G SDI and 1920 by 1080 and 5994 and progressive scanning. So there's a lot of information that comes in over the input signing. Now, one thing that we had to do in this setup was actually set up the outputs and the color space. And that's really important to understand, because out of the box, it's in a certain color space, and we weren't getting video to actual monitors themselves. And let's kind of dig into that a little deeper. So you have the 3 HDMI outputs, you have the 3 SDI outputs, and you have the USB out. And we'll get into that in a moment, and that's for streaming from that perspective. So on HDMI out 1, that is my program out. And that is the screen behind me. Okay? So in this particular space here, we see the output status. It's 1080 at 5994p. And then we had to change the color space. By default, it comes in 444. And that monitor was having a hard time referencing where we were. And so what we did was we changed it to RGB 0 to 255, and the color space was able to change. And it especially so for output 2. So output 2, or HDMI out 2, we went in and we were actually having a real hard time with it, because we had the color space set at 0 to 2, or we had it at 444, and then it said no signal, as it does now, right? And so we had to change the color space to RGB 0 to 255, and then it came up within the monitor. So that's a little tip you guys may want to consider. But I can change the signal type. Is it HDMI to DVI? Is it a DVI-D signal? I can change the brightness, the contrast, the saturation. I can actually change red, green, and blue values as well. So that's a little bit on the video output and working with a video output and assigning them. Last, I want to actually go to the USB out. And it's very simple from the concept of how this actually functions, right? So I have over here my OBS hooked up right through USB-C, out the USB streaming output, which is USB-C. So coming in, it recognized it right away. I set it up. And what's really cool about this is we actually had another cable that we were getting some video issues with because it found out it was actually connecting via USB 2.0 and not 3.0. So the cable we were using was not a 3.0 cable. In order to use full 1080p from the output, it needs to be a USB 3.0 cable. So just keep that in mind. So the status itself, it tells me right away, what is the status? It's connected at USB 3.0. So that is just a nice reference point from when you're setting this up. Are you really sending content? And as I'm switching to the shot in the tavern with the fireplace and the clock, then I go back to the video itself. I can see all of that in the stream as it's going out to program simultaneously and changing here on the multi-view monitor itself. A few other things that you can kind of get into that we don't really need to function too much, or go into the function too much here, is the transition time. How long do you want this to be? The mix and wipe preset time. What about your key times? How long you want your keys to come up? So you can kind of get into how long each one of those and the output fade time. So there's a lot of flexibility from that point. What type of mix and wipe transition, what direction it's going to be. There's a lot of different options there. Once again, you can play around with those options. Picture-in-picture and keying functions. You can really dig really deep into the position, the size, the cropping of the picture-in-picture. But we're not going to sort of go through that because that's a lot. Audio input-output configuration, you can get into that. There's audio that follows video itself. How do you want all of the audio input to follow video as you're going through on the program out and the output of program? That's something that a lot of people like or don't like. It just depends on your environment. But there's audio follows. Then you have audio auto mixing. So there's some auto mixing functionality built in this. As you can see, there's a lot inside this package itself. There's macros, and that's pretty typical, right? And it's your standard typical macro of set up this, then a break to this, then we want to pull in this. Like, it's as a traditional mixer, so it's nothing you're going to do on the fly. There's going to need to be some setup that you're going to really need to consider when doing macros, and really that's for any broadcast switching console itself. Macros themselves just take some time to set up. Like I said, a sequencer, I can sequence the macros or certain demo items to go through, or call it a certain program, so it has the sequencing capability. There is also some auto switching as well. We can turn that on and off. We can have it input the how we're switching. We're doing that, target program preview. What's the transition type? How it's scanning the input itself. There's a lot of different elements to the auto switching. So this mixer gives some functionality from even an auto switching capability, not just a sequencer itself. So that's something that's really cool. RS-232 tally GPIOs, inputs, outputs of triggers. There's some triggers in here. There's LAN control. There's camera control, and then system setup. So let's recap on the Roland V-160HD. So taking a look at this, the construction, well made, well designed, well put together. A lot of functionality from inputs and outputs, whether it's SDI or HDMI, and with scalers for HDMI. Also audio, inputs and outputs, Bluetooth audio as an input. There's an app for more detailed, in-depth control of the unit. There's a lot of functionality. So what would one pay for something like this? And really, we are shocked at all that you get inside the Roland V-160HD. V-160HD. So it maps for $49.95. So for under $5,000, there are so many options underneath this hood. And it is used for applications like esports, houses of worship, corporate events. So check out, when you have a moment, go on their site, check out some of the more details and functionality. But great job to Roland for putting this together as far as a product's concerned. And if you do have any comments or questions about this product, or maybe even other future shows or other products you'd like us to review, make sure you guys hit us up in the comments below. And as always, make sure you guys like and subscribe so you can get those notifications when you hit that subscribe button. But for now, that's this episode of Input Output.